So Brent, you went off into the mountains with John Marsh and recorded a podcast.
Yeah, just he and me in a shed, middle of nowhere. It was rough.
Did you get marshed?
Oh yeah.
Are we about to get marshed?
I mean, I think so. I mean, we just went there. We talked about the realest, raw stuff that we really think and believe, and we didn't hold anything back. I love spending time with John, and obviously you've gotten to spend time with John as well.
Me too, yeah.
And he just has this way of speaking to the heart of matters, and I think it's because he's been through so much. We'll link to it in the show notes, but John, to give you a preview, at 21, he was getting divorced, had attempted suicide, and he was $1 million in debt and addicted to methamphetamine. And now, in his early 50s, he runs a big business. He is still married. Marriage was saved. And he's built this incredibly beautiful life. And in many ways, it was a cosmic rescue. And it's a beautiful heart posture that he's developed over a long period of time. But I think that's where he really gets into how we develop. We always want to avoid pain, and we always want to avoid hardship and adversity. But that's actually where we grow. And so I'm just really looking forward to seeing how people react to the topics. I mean, like I said, we went there.
Well, let's go there. Let's get marshed.
I think we should start in the very beginning. And the very beginning is the very beginning of our relationship. So John and I got introduced through a mutual friend, but it was without much context originally. And I lovingly said to him, why don't we delay our relationship? Isn't that, John, isn't that how you remember it starting?
Well, if you were on the receiving end, it felt a little different than I might delay. So this guy says, hey, would you like to meet this guy, Brent Beshore? Now, I'm like a mosquito in a nudist colony. I always want to meet somebody, especially cool people. And so I was like, sure. So he sends this email and he says, hey, y'all guys ought to meet. And I said, Brent, I'm coming through your area on a mentor road tour. Me and Ash were going to see, for 2 weeks, we were going to drive and see our mentors cover about 3,000 miles. And we're going to stop in Columbia because, it's all shucks. Come by and see me is a permanent equities kind of thing. And Brent's, so I all shucks tried to come by and see him. He said, no, I'm not going to be there. But then I said, well, okay, he's traveling. He's going with his family to Colorado. But then I said, well, what about a quick Zoom call just to get to know one another? And he said, I don't think so. I said, this guy's a butthole. A really big one, like the biggest one I've ever met. Nobody says no to a 15 or 30-minute Zoom call. But there was a purpose in it. So this is Brent's delayed thing, so the timing would be perfect. So as you can see, it didn't feel so much like you were just allowing things to mature.
Yeah, what's hilarious about that is I literally didn't even remember. So we meet 2 years later through a mutual friend, through Chris Powers, who's been on the podcast. And I think we referenced you, 4 or 5 times during that podcast. So I figured, we had to have you on. It was reluctant, but we had to have you on, know. And we meet 2 years later, and I didn't even remember this happening. And I mean, by the way, I don't turn down that many. I mean, I feel like, especially with an introduction, but the guy who introduced us and loved him to death, but didn't give much context. And so I didn't know why we'd be hopping on. I didn't know who this guy was. I had no idea. Anyway, it's God's sovereignty that we came back together at the time we did. And when we finally really met each other, I mean, we've been talking about every week ever since.
Yeah, it's been perfect. I mean, it was the difference in a home run and a foul ball's timing. And boy, did God know. I mean, you and I would have screwed it up if we met early. Yeah. We would have thought it may be about business. Or we maybe would have thought it was about this or that, but we wouldn't have had this amazing opportunity to be friends that we've had.
Yeah, man. I want to start really kind of getting things going. I want to talk about actually business first, because your business journey has been remarkable. And I actually want to start at the end and actually go backwards. So a little bit different than what you normally do. And so I want to give people a snapshot today. So the John today, John and Ash, you guys are business partners. Ash is his wife. Man, she's a power player. She's a strong woman and fierce and loving at the same time. It's unbelievable to see her in action. And you guys manage a couple $1 billion
of real estate today. So maybe you can talk about the scope, scale. What are you guys trying to do today? What have you done today before we start working our way backwards into kind of the maturation of what you all have done?
Well, today we're trying in some ways to reframe the world of possibilities. I mean, could real estate developers be seen as a blessing and not a burden? Could they add value and not extract value? Could we build a new asset class of real estate around iconic, thoughtful places? And boy, are we at a good one to talk about that up in the hills here in Tennessee, where people come from all over the world to have a little bit of great food and some Southern hospitality and see what it's like. So we just believe that there's a way to make your economics teacher and your Sunday school teacher happy, to work at the intersection of purpose and profits. And so now we steward about $2 billion worth of real estate in 12 small towns around the country, from a population of 800 in the smallest town, Bloomfield, Kentucky, to the largest, over 180,000, Winter Haven, Florida. And really, it's just putting this idea we have that there's irreplaceable real estate, when a sophisticated real estate would love, and we're putting it to test. Can you do it at scale?
So when you say irreplaceable real estate, like, what does that mean? Because isn't all real estate irreplaceable?
Well, it is. We think ours is the irreplaceable of the irreplaceable.
Okay.
So built by people who don't live anymore, with materials we don't have anymore, in methods we don't do anymore, and entitlements we can't get approved anymore.
Got it. So these are places that you just couldn't build the same thing again. There's just no way the economics would work, the zoning would work. These are one shot, once in a lifetime.
And how many downtowns does each town have? I mean, and that's what's amazing about it. It's like history frozen in buildings. And so what we believe is what's been given is important. And so what if we started looking at the embedded value of a full masonry structure on the corner in Main Street that was built, that it'll be there another 100 years if we keep a roof on it. And what happens is the world has convinced us that the value of a property is based on really its income. If a sheetrock box that has a Rite Aid in it is worth the same thing as a beautiful historic building built 200 years ago, they're not looking at it from multiple lenses. And the great thing, even the insurance companies reinforce this to us, because they say, hey, we can't give you replacement value on this, or we can't replace it like it was built. It's like, oh, interesting.
How does insurance then work on these buildings if they truly are irreplaceable?
Well, they give you insurance, and then if you have a catastrophic situation, the defecation hits the ventilation. I mean, it's really difficult. We had a building burn last year, and now for the first time in 100 years, we've lost one of our gyms. It's like, oh, we lost a piece of Mount Rushmore. It's like, we lost something we can't replace. Now, our challenge is how can we, with integrity, put something people will protect 100 years from now? So that's really the challenge. But the beauty of it is, think about the greenest buildings that exist that we can create already exist. And so there's something wonderful about saving what we have, but it's quite different than building new. So if you ask a big hotel guy what you should have, he'll tell you a big hotel. They kind of lead the witness. Well, if you ask a new construction person what you should do with a historic structure, what do you think he'll tell you?
Build something new.
That's right. And so we're really kind of redeeming, is there hope for small town America? And not just hope, but could it be not an average investment, not an exceptional investment, but an irreplaceable investment? Can it be something, when it's loved and taken care of and layered with beautiful programming, that can be worth infinite amount more than something you can construct new?
So you're managing $2 billion across the United States. You're bringing on new projects all the time. Your team's expanding. You're growing. You're flourishing. You're thriving. And this all started in Opelika, Alabama, which I say correctly now because I think you told me Opelika, right? Isn't that
that's
how you,
Ash? She said
that's how she
Opelika, Alabama.
Opelika, Alabama,
That's right.
which is right next to Auburn.
That's right, 6 miles away.
So it's kind of a college town region, but Opelika is a distinct, separate town with a little bit of gap in between Auburn and Opelika. Been down there. You invited me down. I think you were surprised when I said, "Yep, I'll be down." Next month or 2 weeks from now or whatever? We spent the day down there. That was kind of the first time we really had an opportunity to really get to know one another. And you toured me down the main street there, the kind of the downtown area, and I was just blown away. You own seemingly every building downtown.
We still have 200 buildings and properties downtown now. We've done 300 renovations in 10 square blocks. So we chose to love 10 square blocks, not a type of real estate, not construction of types like commercial or residential. We just said we're going to love a geographical area, and we're going to care about everything within these boundaries.
I mean, it came across as obvious. I mean, obviously everyone knew you. Mm-hmm. You had relationships with the shop owners, and it seemed like a non-adversarial relationship. It seemed like, in fact, the opposite of that. It seemed like that you were encouraging them and loving on them through the real estate. Maybe you can talk about, kind of take us back to the next click, which is you loved on 10 square blocks in Opelika. I don't know anybody else who can say that they loved on one sort of geography for how many years?
25 years.
25 years.
Before it started really getting, or, maybe 20 years before anybody noticed and said it mattered.
Right. And so you guys, I mean, it sort of crept up, I think, on the community, right? Where you guys just started loving on this one geography and making it better and making it better. Talk about how you think about dedicating your life to that one area. And obviously you're expanding beyond that and trying to take the learnings that you learned from that and transmitting it to these other areas. But how did that start? Why Opelika? And what made you say we want to do this for, decades?
Well, it started ashes from Opelika, and I didn't love Opelika in the beginning. It kind of snuck up on me. I was from Albany, Georgia, about 2 hours south. But one day, Ash and I bought this old junkie house at a time, and we had a pretty messed up junkie life, and the house matched it. And downtown, Ash used to have her mom walk our son Nelson, our oldest, downtown, and 3 ladies were executed downtown by a kid. And it's like a gang-style shooting at the old Huckabee's flea market. And Ash just said, I'm just not all right with this. So it started, normally what starts, we've experienced most of the time, is someone buys a property and then they start doing projects and then they start going, oh my goodness, there's other opportunities. Then they have a portfolio. But the last stage we feel is a platform. And so we went through those from a junky old house with no money down, and we owner financed it for 90 days, put $3,300 in it. And it was junky when we started, junky when we finished. I mean, we painted the walls, and there were so many roaches, it just textured the walls, and so it was really nice. And the kitchen floor was a ping pong table, and it looked like a tumor. It was about 4 foot tall. We cut it out, and so we got it done as best we could. Somebody come along and paid us $15,000 above what we had in it, and we've turned that $15,000 into everything that we've stewarded now.
So you took $15,000.
Well, we
took zero,
$3,000, which was a tax return, and turned it to 15, and then
took 3 to 15, and then you turned that into a heck of a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe let's go back, and because I want to talk about the learnings that you have from Opelika and people in real estate, and how small business owners and operators can think about the sort of the growing pains that you guys have had and all that. But I want to go back now to the very beginning. So I think if somebody met you today, it'd be unrecognizable where you started. And to really just see how different life can be by the grace of God, by hard work that you guys have put in, by a lot of self-examination. But maybe take us back to early 20s, take us back to you and Ash had just gotten together, take us back to the very beginning from a business perspective. So personal, business, marriage, everything. Just kind of give us the state of things in the very beginning.
I grew up in Albany, Georgia. My mom tried for 13 years to have a child, couldn't, adopted me, and 18 months later had my little brother. And she just spoiled me. She just said all I ever wanted to be was a mama. So I obeyed my parents up to 14 years old, AB honor roll, beta club, and then started making money. And for the first time, I stepped across a line that I knew was wrong for me and my family, and I felt went against God. And I had sex with a girl. I was 14, she was 13, and everything changed, because once you rebel and you start rebelling, that cycle is so powerful. It's rules and regulations without a relationship cultivates the environment of rebellion. And so I rebelled from my parents and what they believed. 17 years old, tried drugs for the first time, got high, and I committed not to do that. My friend did, and he did, and I did. And then and started really working and making money. So money and girls drove me bananas because I wanted to be accepted. And you don't have any question whether money accepts you or whether a girl accepts you. And so I fell into this and met Ash. She was 18, I was 19, and she came by, and I had this little business. I've never really had a real job. I started in the high-end audio business, putting in stereo systems. She came by to get speakers put in her car. And I thought, oh, she is pretty. Now, I was dating this girl, and we were living together there in the town. We had moved to Auburn. This big guy named Big Jimmy, he was a Jewish guy that loved me, and he invited me there. And he didn't like the girl I was dating. He said, nah, she ain't marriage material. I'm going to find you marriage material. I said, okay. I thought he was kidding. And he didn't like her because she didn't want me to spend time with him. But Ash came in and got speakers put in, and then Big Jimmy was like, I like that girl. I was like, all right, great. And we just keep going. Well, next thing I know, Jimmy's done hired her and bet her $500 she can't take me away from the girl that I'm living with. And Ash is like, you're on, fat man. And so,
so it's a bet.
It is a bet.
Man.
$500. And Ash got the $500. I mean, Big Jimmy did it. But Ash didn't know when she was dating me that I was doing drugs and that I was like this. And she had obeyed her parents all the way up. And she asked for her dad's blessing at 18 to move in with me. And he said, no. He said, if you leave, don't come back. And she had grown up in a pretty violent situation early in her life. You know, she's scared of getting hit on because if anything wasn't going good, there was going to be problems. And so we got together, started living together, and I won her really through false advertising. I promised her she was going to be the focus of my life, and the minute she said, I do, I started chasing business. And so we got into the wrecked used car business, building totals. So we were buying totaled Land Cruisers, Tundras, Sequoias.
And you're 20 years old and she's 19.
Well, yeah, 21.
21.
When we got married, and we were, getting in this business heavy, and we're doing a lot of this, building totals, getting them recertified by the state and selling them. So I'm a wrecked used car salesman, which is a tough gig, to say the least. I mean, you show them pictures of the thing wrecked, and you got to convince them that it's going to be amazing again. And people think about cars like they're hatched, not assembled. Now, houses they know are put together, but cars they think just come out done, and they forget humans, and they have to work on these things. But put them together anyway. We're in the car business. And my partner's ending up, he's doing the money and handling the contracts, and I'm getting high and doing the work. And I was gifted with my hands. Well, during that time, me and Ash started kind of drifting apart. We found out she was pregnant on birth control. And, that whole 99% effective, I wasn't that bright. But I was like, if you do it 100 times, are you sunk? This stuff's a sham. But she gets pregnant, and within a few months, she's thinking about aborting our son because our marriage is so bad. And she ends up having him. But right after that, she ends up committing adultery with one of our employees who happened to be one of my banker's sons, and our whole life fell apart. Mm-hmm. And so the drugs had escalated. I was hooked on meth by the time this happened. And I was getting high all the time and working really hard, trying to find something that would make me feel different. And she was feeling unloved. And I led my family in a way that didn't honor God, and that's what I got. You don't plant corn and get apples. She didn't leave me because she's a bad lady. She left me because I didn't do what I was supposed to do, and it was on me. So that pressure drove me, and I kept hearing, kill yourself, kill yourself. And I kept hearing, take your life, take your life. And the longer I listened, the sweeter it sounded. Because I was like, this life isn't worth living. I have screwed up, and there's no fixing this thing. So I started making a plan. I went up in the attic of my house, got a big pulley up over an exhaust fan hole, got the rope set up and all, and I set the day I was going to hang myself. And so I went up in the attic of my house to hang myself. I got down on that old plywood floor, and I cried out to a God I had never known before. And like lightning struck me, every hair on my body stood up. And for 2 solid hours, love got past the fence. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel dirty, selfish, and alone. And there I was. And I said, what do I do? I said, God, I don't see why you would want me. And why would you take me? But if you will, you got me. And I gave it all. And I didn't quit drugs, they quit me. And I come back out of the attic of that house, and Ash was downstairs, and I say, baby, I just got born again. Man, I'm changed. She's like, you're a liar. Don't lie to me no more. And went away. And so then I spent months watching her go out on dates with this other guy through the keyhole while the good Lord was working on my heart. And, there's something about hope. I was hopeless until hope got there. And when there's hope in your future, there's power in your present. And I met this lady we had sold a car to, and she was like, I was working on a car, and she's like, God will heal your marriage. I thought, you're a nut. do you know what's happening here? She said, well, my husband left me for his secretary and God healed our marriage. And I thought, you? He's an executive. Y'all are perfect. You got these great kids and a beautiful house with a picket fence. She said, yeah, he'll heal you. And that began the journey, because once you start believing what you're doing is wrong, you lose the power to do it. And I said, divorce is wrong. And 3 days from the divorce being final, we cut it off and we found a way to start talking to each other. And through some great people adding value to us who had walked through similar things, we found one another again. And then, I learned 7 years of counseling 2 times a week. And if you don't think you need counseling, you do. I don't care who you are. I don't care how smart you are. You need people in your corner. I mean, you probably don't fix your own automatic transmission. And marriage and relationships way more complicated than automatic transmission. And so through that, we built a life together. And now since, we've reconciled over 200 broken marriages. So we're not just in the property business, we're in the people business. It's people and places. And we love people and we love places, and we see beauty in broken things.
Man, I've heard you tell that story, I don't know, 3 or 4 times now. And every time it just gets me. I think one of the things that I see in your life that I didn't see in mine was I didn't see a need for God. I didn't see a need. I didn't see my own brokenness until much later. And it's like I spent most of my 20s thinking I was great and knowing I wasn't. And it's just this deep disconnect. And it's interesting because, I'm sure you wouldn't wish what you went through on your worst enemies, but it's incredible how God works to take broken things, but you got to acknowledge they're broken first. And I feel like, in me, and I see in our society today, there's just such a reluctance to say things are broken. Right? We get to blame it on all kinds of things. We get to pass off responsibility. And man, I got to tell you, when I stopped passing off responsibility and when I started seeing how broken I was, that's when healing occurs. And I mean, I just hear your story and you cried out to a God you didn't know. It wasn't like you were a Christian. It wasn't like you were...
I didn't walk an aisle and pray a prayer or say some special song. And also, it doesn't have to be that way. It had to be that way for me. Just because I experienced that, I've seen people so many different ways experience, but it's always love. Love isn't what God does. It's who he is. You cut his finger off, it's a hunk of love.
Yeah.
And when it shows up, you know the difference. I mean, that's the story.
So, you've reconciled a tremendous amount of our marriages. I mean, one of the things you did for my wife and I was you invited us down and we did a marriage intensive with you and Ash for 48 hours. I mean, no phones, like you shut down your whole life. It was 100% focused on us. You did personality testing of us. Turns out my wife and I are literally opposites in every way. We couldn't figure out for the life of us why we'd get in these disagreements, and I remember it was just like revelation after revelation. We're sitting there and you made us take the personality test like at the same time in the same room. And I remember Erica at one point, there's like one of these charts you put up and it was like, okay, do the words on the left side or the right side more align with, who you are? And she goes, well, obviously left side. I mean, no one would pick the right side. And literally I picked every word on the right side. And I would kind of raise my hand. I remember she looked at me like I was an alien. She's like, what is going on? We're 14 years into our marriage. And she was like, oh my gosh, who did I marry? And it sounds like, obviously everyone comes as a different path to these realizations, but when I got married, I didn't know who I'd married. I mean, it sounded like you didn't know who you married.
No
She
way.
didn't know who you married.
I just thought, man, more sex and less bills, sex and supper in the same package. I am winning. And as long as those stayed happening, I thought this thing is, it's working.
Yeah.
But it's simple, but we don't understand. Most of us marry our compatible opposite.
Yeah.
And then we try to change them.
Yeah, man. Well, so I want to talk about marriage. I want to really deep dive into it because I think it's one of the things that when I think I set my expectations too low. When I look at a lot of the marriages that I know, friends, family, I'm like, oh, that's what a marriage is, right? Yeah, you depending on the marriage, it's like, yeah, they like each other, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of intimacy. They're it's kind of like Cold War, but they still live together, right? They're committed to one another, and you slowly look at the world class is just the best you've ever seen. So when I look at the marriages that I've been around, I'm like, oh, we're doing okay. Everything's comparison based, right? So like, how good's your marriage? Well, I don't know. How good's it compared to what I see their marriage as being,
That's
right? Or
right.
how you get little glimpses here and there. And by the way, it's impossible. I think people know this to really know what's going on inside a marriage from the outside. It's almost impossible. But you get these little keyhole glimpses into it. And you say, yeah, my marriage is okay. And I think that it's only been in the last 3 or 4 years I've started to see marriages where they looked so fundamentally different than my marriage and so fundamentally better than my marriage that I'm like, well, I don't want the norm. Like, I want the best marriage in the history of the world. And I got to tell you, the work to get there, I had no idea, because you got to dredge up a whole bunch of stuff that, I think you call it the toxic waste.
Yeah. Now say it's nuclear waste in the basement.
Nuclear waste in the basement. Yeah. You sweep a lot of stuff under the rug through the years.
All right. I said too soon, we swept it under the rug till the rug didn't touch the floor. And every conflict we had was historical and hysterical. And most of the time, a woman will whip your butt in a historical battle. And so most of our arguments are the same argument every time. Pretty soon, if you do it well, your kids will be able to repeat what he's fixing to go for the mama card. What about your mama? What about this? Or remember when? And if you're how do I know if I have unforgiveness? Well, are you fussing with anybody in the shower and they're not there and you win? You got unforgiveness. Does it keep coming back up? And what happens is we try to put new carpet over the nuclear waste, or maybe a little extra concrete. But any relationship we have unforgiveness in, that thing is going to continue to gin up in our marriages. Pretty soon, Ash, all we could talk about was the weather, because anything else, we'd have a conflict. We were so separated. And so this is what happens in marriage. And really, there's not a lot of tools. I mean, imagine if you're the best carpenter in the world and I ask you to build a great house with a high heel shoe and a butter knife. You're still going to struggle even though you're the best carpenter in the world.
Yeah.
That's marriage.
So, I think I'm not the only one who has gone through ups and downs in marriage. I think every marriage does. And, our audience is business owners and operators. These are people who are achievers, right? These are people who like to get stuff done. And I can tell you from my experience that it was a heck of a lot easier to go to work and focus on work than focus on my family. A lot easier to focus on a win at the office than a win in my marriage. So maybe you can speak to them. And let's say that, I'm just going to paint a scene. Let's say somebody's in their, mid-30s. They've got young kids. Work's going pretty well. Not perfect by any means. There's a lot of stress, a lot of pressure, a lot of burdens that are put on them at work. And marriage has gone, let's call it stale. Let's say it's just, for the most part, it's roommates who occasionally have sex, right? They do things for one another. And look, they try to keep things cordial. They irritate each other. But it's not intimate, and it's not united by any means. What would be the things that you would say to those people when you first bring them in? Like, what are the ways in which you can take a marriage that's, I wouldn't say loveless, but a lot of the intimacy, a lot of the romance, a lot of the excitement has drained out of it. And they find themselves just in a rut. And there's pressures at work and there's pressures with kids. And they know there's something better out there, but they don't know what it is and they don't know how to get there. What do you say if you could sit down and talk to those people?
It's normal and there's hope for you. This is the way it is. It's not easy. You feel like you're charging hell with a squirt bottle a lot of times. But there is hope, and it's to be intentional. Great marriages are built, not found. And if you've got a lot better plan for your finances than you do for your marriage, you shouldn't have any confusion of why it's working there. I mean, we say 5 F's: faith, family, fun, fitness, and finance. And we want a sophisticated plan for each. And so for our marriage, what's your vision for your marriage? Imagine a business without a vision. Without vision, people and companies perish. So what is the vision for your marriage? So vision for our marriage from my side is, first, I don't forget what it's like to be without her. Now, some people don't know what that's like. Some people have to lose things to find them. And something lost and found can be more precious than something never lost. But the vision for our marriage is at the very end of our life. I say, and Ash doesn't like this, because I say, we'll be old. Nobody will want to talk to us, not flying us all over the world and seeing stuff. I said, we'll be old, sagging and dragging. Nobody will want to hear what we got to say, but you're going to look over and say, the best decision I ever made besides choosing God was marrying you. And so every day now, I work on that. I want her to be the most loved. You know, I asked her, I said, can I ever be the best? I mean, I hang out with guys like Brent Beshore. I feel like I'm the stupidest, slowest, brokest person compared to all you guys. You're so darn fast. And I'm just like, they're so good at everything. Can I be the best at anything? She said, you sure can. You can be the best at loving me. And so it's intentional, guys. Great marriage is like abs. You ain't going to get them by accident. And more often they're revealed, not built.
The first time I ever heard you talk about marriage, you said something similar. And I remember thinking to myself a little bit, to be honest, I was a little hopeless. Because you said, hey, there's hope. You got to have a sophisticated plan for your marriage. And I was like, I don't know what that means. Now, I know a lot more now. And, you know, thankfully, you've worked through a lot of stuff with Erica and I, and it's been beautiful. But like, let's say no one has any framework for what that means. Like, what does a sophisticated plan for your marriage mean? And does that sound like clinical? I mean, it sounds like you've taken a business principle and it's like, well, honey, it's Thursday at 7 a.m. It's time for our weekly check-in, right? There's something that sounds very unromantic or very lacking in intimacy in creating a plan, but I don't think you view it that way at all. Like, help somebody understand that has no framework. What does a plan for your marriage mean practically?
Well, and I think you're right. We have pulled business principles down into marriage, and some of it is unsexy to get to it. I mean, a budget's unsexy for a marriage, right? But money causes real problems. And not being fulfilled in the you two together sexually is a problem, and you got to kind of sometimes deal with it clinically. I mean, there is a part to it that's just like 1 + 1 = 2. There's blocking and tackling around this, but what we believe is not having a plan is a plan. It's just a bad one. And so the key is not having division. So there's a difference in vision and division. Division's two visions. And we tell people, if you want to start something simple, do this. Say if you've got $10,000 left at the end of the month or $10 million left at the end of the month, wife, what's your top 3 priorities of how you would use it? Let her write it down separately from you if you're a man, and write down, you know, hey, okay, here's my top 3. And compare them. If they're not the same, you're divided. And that's a simple way to start. What you want to do is get on the same page, because unity is a place of blessings. Wherever Ash and I are unified, we are unstoppable. And so the first thing to do is maybe take a few areas like money, like maybe it's how the kids, you know, with some of the principles you care about with them, like are they going to be homeschooled or go to school, and what do we care about the top few things they have? So pick a few areas and try to get a clear vision and not division. It doesn't have to be super sophisticated. It can be on the back of a napkin. Or you can do like us. Ours is, well, somebody called it recently spreadsheet porn. So we've got this incredible sheet we use on our 5S where we plan our year and where we measure all the things that matter. And it, for Ash and I, it makes us happy to see moving forward. We like watching stuff grow.
Maybe we could start kind of down the path of, because it's, I mean, I've seen your spreadsheet and it's intimidating, right? I mean, you gave us a template, and to be honest, like Eric and I, you gave it to us 6 months ago. We still haven't gotten it all figured out, right? It takes an incredible commitment. And I think the level of commitment that you all have to each other is something that's grown over time. It's not like you went from a broken marriage to doing, 35, 40 hours of spreadsheet work and making sure you're aligned in all these areas, right? There's a heck of a lot of steps.
7 years of just counseling without any of that, just to get to see one another again and to deal with the hurts we had. I mean, we say our marriage was rebuilt on sweaty socks. And so guys, the best question I've ever asked in marriage, and I got this as Ash and I were broken and she was still struggling seeing someone else, and we were going to see whether we'd make it. And I said, I don't know how to love you. I thought loving you is grabbing your butt and telling you you're pretty, but obviously you don't think that's too awesome. And she's like, I hate that. It's like, well, I still think it's awesome. Even you may hate it, but I still think this thing's awesome. And I'm going to keep doing it, but I'm going to add in some other things. So what this question is, what is the one thing I could do to show you I love you? The number one thing that I'm not currently doing. And she said, number 1, don't throw sweaty socks on the floor inside out. And I said, you'll never pick up another one. Now, guys, it's funny, and gals, that was the number one thing, but it was her number one thing. And we started building a marriage on that one act of love she knew I was doing only because she wanted me to. And that's how you start. That's as simple as it is. And the interesting thing about that, the backstory was that we didn't know till a few years ago in counseling that Ash used to, when her dad got home, she'd pull his socks off, sweaty socks, big tube socks, as a little 8-year-old girl, and shove her arms up to her elbow in those sweaty socks and turn them. and I was making her feel that way. And so it's simple things.
Yeah, I remember when you said that, I was in a group of guys at a retreat, and you were speaking about marriage, and I remember I was furiously writing down, and that was one of the things I highlighted, and I couldn't wait to come home and ask my wife the same thing. So I came home, and I was ready to be teed up for her to be like, I am so thankful you asked me that. So I asked her, I said, what's the one thing I could do to show you that I really loved you? And she paused for a second, and she kind of looked down, and I was just waiting. I was like, man, this is going to be really good. And she goes, I don't have an answer. And I said, oh, okay. You don't have anything? And she's like, oh, there's plenty of things, but I don't want you to ask me the same question. And I think for me, the unexpected part, and, for having a business that was growing and people that I really enjoyed being around, and it seemed like, things were going up and to the right in the business world, to have the realization that maybe things are even worse than I thought at home. I mean, I didn't think things were great. There's a little bit of Cold War going on. We felt more like roommates. But to have somebody say, hey, I don't want you to ask me the same thing. Like, I'm not interested in what you think I could do better for you. What it showed was just, I think, a fundamental lack of connection between us, and that there was a lot more hurt there than I realized. And so, I just want to encourage anybody who listens to that to be open-minded about what comes out the other side. It may not be for you. Ash said something very specific, and you were able to build your marriage on it. For me, it actually took us quite a long time.
Great point.
To get to the point in which we could even answer that question for one another. And I think one of the things that I've learned, and I don't know if you can hear it when John talks, but he's talking all about what he can do for his wife. He's not talking about what his wife can do for him. And this is something that, you and I had talked about quite a bit, is if you go into a setting where you're going to ask your wife, what is the one thing I can do for you to make you feel more loved and appreciated? And really what you want is for her to ask you the same question. Because I actually wasn't ready for her to ask me the same question, but she just assumed that that's what I was doing. Because I think in the past, I had been focused very much on reciprocity. If I do these things for you, you'll do these things for me. And I think that's how a lot of marriages are built. There's a Jewish rabbi, he calls it fish love, right? Which is, I love this piece of fish. I love how it tastes. It's like, well, you love it because of what it does for you. And that's always stuck in my head, this idea of fish love, right? And I think that a lot of marriages are built on fish love. I think my marriage for a long time was built on fish love. Real love, agape love, that type of love is for the good of the other. And I got to tell you, it is a total different transformation when you start focusing on truly how can I serve the other person in my marriage, and really beyond marriage, in the friendship, in the business relationship, for their good, not expecting anything in return. It's an otherworldly love, and there's so much power to that. But I feel like that you got to start somewhere. Oh, yeah. And I think that the thing I've realized, another principle that you and I have talked about, is every time I think it's her fault, it's actually my fault. And look, hopefully she comes to that same conclusion, right? Because the only thing that you can control is you, and barely. Right. Sometimes you can control it, right? And so, I think those two principles of what can I do truly to serve her, not for any reciprocity, not for what she can do for me, not trying to do a certain thing to get a certain thing. And then two, really looking at who am I? And maybe I think that 99% of the problems are her problems. 99% of the garbage in our marriage is her fault. And by the way, maybe it's true.
Right.
Let's just say for a second it is true. It doesn't matter. That 1%, and it's not about, I've heard this before, it's like, own 100% of your percentage, right? But I actually think it goes beyond that. I think a great marriage is owning 100% of the marriage, regardless, not even owning just 100% of your stuff, but owning 100% of the marriage and saying, hey, what can I do to serve you? What can I do to show you that I care? And by the way, to show you got to care, you actually got to care in the beginning.
Right.
Because the other person can tell if you don't care.
You can't fake it. It's love. And people want to be deeply loved. Someone that will see me and love me I'm going by the gas pump for love all the time. And it looks different. And so you're exactly right. But the other thing I would say about that question is really if you can be wise and look for the timing. The difference in a home run and a foul ball's timing. And if you can see the window where that question can make the greatest impact. I happened to ask it at the right time. Ash has never asked me that question. 30 years of marriage, she's still never asked. It wasn't a question for her to ask. This was something I needed. It worked with our sons too. And our oldest son, he was there when, he was 3 when our marriage blew up and whatever, 5 when we got back together. But I asked him as he got a little older, what's the one thing your daddy does that when I do it, you feel the most loved? He said, take me everywhere you go, Daddy. So it's just, to your point, it's caring about what they care about, seeing them.
Yeah.
And we're so rarely seen that it's so powerful when someone sees you.
I was going to say, and there's something that I've really kind of been working through the last year. Like, what is the thing that I really want? And I think this is what everyone wants, which is to be fully known, right? So they actually know me for who I truly am. Not for the show I put on, not for the masks I have, but just for me. Who am I truly? And then I'm loved in that being fully known. In all my warts, in all my struggles, in all the badness and the grossness and all the things that I've done. But the person knows that and they love me despite that, right? And that leads into sort of 2 main things that I'm trying. It's really hard to live in, which is nothing to fear and nothing to hide. If you think about a marriage, and this is something, again, my wife and I are working through even right now. It's like, okay, how can we be fully known to one another, the good and the bad, to see us each other at our worst and say, I see you at your worst and I love you. Truly, for you. I'm always for you. And then how can we not fear in our marriage? That's something that, we struggle through a lot. I'd fear what she would do. She'd fear what I would do. Or is one of us going to leave at some point, right?
And if the D word comes up, it increases that. If you say divorce in the marriage, once that word's said, that thing is powerful. And Ash and I still struggle. I still have a hard time. Guys, there's still times that I go back and think about what happened. Imagine now when some guy flirts with Ash and I see it. There's no free ride. You're going to have troubles. But that's all right. It's part of it. We're doing it together. And sometimes Ash and I will fuss on the way to help somebody or on the way home because we still got our stuff. We just used to live 29 days of hell and a day of heaven. Now we live 29 days of heaven and a day of hell. Hell's still after us. We still got problems. And there's still nuclear waste that comes up every once in a while. But it's not like it used to be. It's so much better. I never dreamed it could be this good, but it is so much less than perfect.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you told me a long time ago is your marriage is actually in a really good spot when you can fight about the thing that you're fighting about.
That's right.
And I remember being like, fighting about the thing you can fight about. Oh, yeah, because when we fight, it'll be something specific, but we won't actually ever fight over that thing. We'll fight over decade plus of hurts and pains and all the, you did this and you always do that. And, all these things.
Always and never start hitting big.
Always and never is exactly right. And so, I think that's where, again, the expectations is never to have a stress-free, conflict-free marriage. In fact, I don't know how you'd have a deep, intimate relationship with anybody and not have conflict. That to me, that sounds like hell. And we think
conflict is wrong, actually, and it's normal, it's neutral, and it's natural. It's what we do with it. It was designed to make our relationships better. And just because you're having conflict, be afraid when you get to the place you're unwilling to have conflict because you've become almost apathetic. You don't care. It's going to always be this way, and it doesn't matter. I think be courageous in your marriage. Why would we not want to be the closest to the person that we've chosen to do this? I had this statement, and this is probably radical and off the thing, but we were in Italy in January for our oldest son's wedding, and I said, if the person you're married to isn't the most interesting person in the world to you, you're an idiot.
Yeah, and look at when you go to a restaurant and you see couples out to a restaurant. How many of them are on their phones? How many of them they have nothing to say? They're kind of staring off into space. They're just there to eat. They're cohabitating, eating together, but that's about it.
Yeah.
And I think that really shows, the average marriage, and I can say this because I think that we had a very average marriage, at least until recently. Our marriage has gotten crazy more intimate. It's been amazing. But you know what? The one thing you said is don't hide from doubts, don't hide from fears, don't hide from conflict. And I think that's something that both my wife and I did for a long time is like we'd get flared up at each other and it'd be like, well, forget it. I'm just going to distance myself. And I'm going to go and hide some things over here that I want, right? That I know may hurt him. And look, whether it's intimacy issues, lust issues specifically for me, there's issues with, my wife, which she was hiding from me. And I got to tell you, when we decided to really not hide things from each other and to run towards each other in conflict, I got to tell you, everything changed. And by the way, even as of 2 weeks ago, I had to say, hey, I had to confess something. I said, hey, I've been hiding this thing from you. And, it wasn't a huge issue, but it was something that I now am so sensitive to hiding. And I think that's what we're built to have pain and suffering and isolation in hiding. Like everything bad grows in darkness.
And the light stuff flourishes.
And man, I tell you what, when you drag that stuff in the light, there's just a power to it. You mentioned counseling before. And, I don't think I ever got this from my family, but I just always was under the impression that the only people who went to counseling are like people who were getting ready to get divorced or had some sort of addiction issue, or there was some like major trauma in their life. Somebody had died or, So I just never even considered counseling. And of course, the counseling is only as good as the counselor.
Amen.
But it's one of those things that I started doing last fall, and I had no idea. I remember the first session I walked in, I was like, I literally don't know what to do. Like, what do we talk about, right? And the counselor kind of laughed and was like, "Are you really? You're new to this? You're completely fresh." And I was like, "That's correct." I was like, do I just start talking or like what? And he's like, "No, shh." Anyway, one of the things that has done for me is there's a lot of things that just would never come up in conversation, and of course, even you come home from a long day and kids are screaming and running around and you're trying to make dinner, and it's not like, oh, hey, honey, by the way, I'd like to talk to you today. I was thinking about this deep wound from when I was a child, and I'd really like to talk to you about it. It's just not going to happen, right?
No.
And especially, people who have young kids. I've got 3 young ones, and it is chaos all the time. And look, you get a date night every now and then, right? But you're not going to spend your date night like, hey, let's
maybe have this thing go sideways on the one night we got.
He's going to go sideways, right? Hey,
and mom and daddy time's out the window if that happens.
That is
and
correct.
We're not risking the farm on this thing.
That is correct. So I think what we do is we settle for this shallowness in our relationships. And by the way, I think men settle for a shallowness in not only their marriage, but I think in male friendships as well. I think there's just this culture that we're all busy, we're all distracted, we all got our things we're striving towards that we're trying to gain, all these sort of worldly games we're playing. And the reality is that it just gives a shallowness. You're going to talk about the latest sports team. You're going to talk about that because it's safe, right? There's no risk to it. You're going to talk about the weather. Ooh, real hot, real cold, a lot of rain, not much rain.
What's happening in the markets?
What's happening in the markets? That's exactly right. Ooh, let's talk about the latest financial innovation, right? Or whatever it might be. And it creates this shallowness with, I think that the quote of Thoreau, the mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation, like really rings true. And I remember when I was in high school and I read that quote, I remember thinking to myself, like, is that true? Is that a real, it's a profound quote, and it's sort of, highlighted, and everyone thought, like, is that really true? And I think the older I get, the more I see, unfortunately, that the older my peers get, the older my friends get, the people who I see, there is a quiet desperation because people are like, is this it? And here's the thing is, I think we're beckoned into something so much deeper than that. And I think our marriage points to that. It's like, I want to be fully known. I want to be loved. I want to not fear, and I want nothing to hide. Man, if you can live like that, that is true freedom. But how many people are hiding things? Man, I saw something recently. It was like something like 65 or 70% of men have like a separate credit card that they don't tell their wife about. There's separate bank accounts.
My wife was taught by her grandmother, you keep things from your husband because at some point you're going to need them. And so many of us even taught this, right? This stuff was put in the operating system early on. And so, what would it be like to be courageously close? And some of us that have, big companies and resources and stuff going, we're like, one person's a spender in the family and the other's a saver, and they're at adverse places. And there's all this rubbing. And we, for Ash and I, the most interesting thing is, so she homeschooled our boys for 20 years. And kind of helped build all of our companies from the back end, watching over the finances, things like that. But 5 years ago, she took over all of our companies, and I stepped out of the way. And guys, that is the most interesting and humbling thing I've experienced in a long time. Nobody calls their old dentist or doctor to see how they're doing. But people just like, well, we don't need you anymore. Ash has got it. I thought, my identity was wrapped up in people asking me questions and being seen as valuable. And now she's there, and it's been another transition. So either, guys, only people like change is wet babies. But you're going to have to change. I mean, stuff has got to change. And that's what's just 1% better. Let's just get a little better. And that's what I love about you, Brent, is you're so courageous to always be ready to think about how you can be better, change. And I've watched it throughout the different areas since I've known you. And guys, that's the heart of a courageous man, is to be willing to change and to add value to others and to be seen as, hey, they're for me.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. It's interesting because I've just realized that I used to hide from so many problems. I mean, I've always had a food issue. I would argue food addiction. There's just an unhealthy relationship since I was a young kid I've had with food. And it's been interesting in counseling to like kind of talk through, food for me was tied to conflict. Food for me was tied to peace. Food for me was tied to celebration. Food for me was tied to comfort. So basically it's like, if I'm feeling bad, I want to eat. If I'm feeling great, I want to eat. Turns out if you're feeling bad or you're feeling great and you always just want to eat, you just always eat, right? And I think that's one of the things that in the past, I've just kind of ran away from it. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go on another diet. I'm going to get my weight back down. It's gotten back up. I just want deep healing. I just never thought that healing would take place. And it's only been in the last, 6 months of really dredging up a lot of the stuff that's underneath these issues. Because I feel like that my tendency, and I see this in a lot of people, is to, it's kind of like mowing your grass when you got a bunch of weeds. Mm-hmm. It's like you take the mower and there's all these weeds popped up and your grass looks like crap. And you mow over it and everything's the same height for a little while. For a couple days there, right? Depends on how much rain. But it looks beautiful. Even though the weeds are still there, you just kind of mow over it and it looks okay. I feel like that's what I did for a long time. I diet and it's like I get my weight back down and then it'd be like, okay, now I can take my eye off of it. But I didn't deal with the underlying issues. And I would just encourage people, everyone's issue is going to be different. Maybe it's some, addiction's a strong word and I don't think many people associate. I would say I had an addiction to food and I still in some ways do. I'm just like a recovering addict to food. You had methamphetamine.
I say we're all addicts in some way. I mean, some people it's food, some people it's sports, some people it's sex, some people it's church.
It's all those things, maybe.
Right, and maybe all those. But here's the thing, in an addiction is it reorders your hierarchy system and you need it. And even when you don't want to go to it, you go to it. And I think we're all born to be addicted to the creator of the universe that's crazy in love with us. And anything else is just less than the best. The idea of getting rid of addictions is not something I've experienced. I think I found things better.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that for me, just recently having been through this, it's the idea of feeling better, being healthier, having more energy to play with my girls, being able to be more alert, right? And just kind of with it. That's definitely a higher order love now than eating everything in sight. Because I know that cycle is going to come back because I'm going to eat. I'm going to feel bad that I ate, but that's going to drive me to focus more on food, which is then going to cause me to eat more. I think this idea of like sin management, right? We've talked about this in the past in the context of Christian context, but I think it's, addiction management, right? It's like, we're just not built to self-manage addiction.
Well, everybody's like, well, why don't you quit? Well, I guarantee you the drug addicts thought 100 times a day about that. Guys, come on. How many things do you have that you want to quit, you want to change, and you feel hopeless to do it? And I think there's 3 things I believe you need. I think you need mentoring, which is someone sharing their wisdom in a way that adds value to you of things they have been through, sharing the story. There's coaching, which I think is holding the environment for great things to percolate up and believing the answers are inside you and just asking great questions. And then there's therapy and counseling, which deals with some of those older issues. But for us, even when y'all came for our weekend we do together, which we try to put extravagant hospitality, incredible love, and we believe love's the environment of life, we never tried to deal with any dredge up your past.
No.
All we tried to do was show you how one another sees the world, tell you how great one another was, and dream about y'all's preferred future together. Now, we did hit a little nuclear waste in there a little bit. And I think what happened, Brent, if I remember best, is you saw your wife differently. And you said, I see her.
Yeah.
And your heart was moved when you saw her differently.
And she saw me.
That's what I was supposed to say. And after you did that, what did she do? She was like, oh,
right.
There he is.
There he is.
I love him.
Maybe we could talk about some of the tools that you all use in that, because it was profound. We'd been married for 14 years, and I really feel like that weekend was a weekend that we saw each other for the first time in many ways. And I remember, I learned this language, right? I'm very future oriented. She's very present oriented. I'd never heard this concept, right? And the lightning bulb went off for me when I realized that, so she lives in the present. She always works from the present into the future. And I'm the exact opposite. I'm always going really far into the future and then working my way back to the present. So I would say something like, hey, honey, I've got this great idea. I want to take you on this extravagant vacation. I think I'm offering up this thing. It's sort of like, I think she's going to praise me. She's going to just be so excited. Oh, you thought of me. You listened to me. That's where I've always wanted to go. Oh, you did all this planning. You did all this work. This incredible. Thank you so much. So I have all this, expectations built up in my head, right? And then I offer this thing up to her. And I'm just waiting for the praise. I'm waiting for the reception. I'm waiting for this to, thank you so much. And I say, okay, so next June, we're going to go to this island and I've found this resort and it's going to be amazing, all this stuff. And she's like, well, who's going to watch the kids? Well, I don't know. I mean, hold on. I've got to think about this for a second. What are we going to do for dinner tonight? And then, and I'm like, what are you talking about?
I just gave you the magic. Did you see
I just
it?
gave you the thing. And all you want to talk about is I don't know who's going to watch our kids. We've got months until this, we'll figure it out. Right. I always thought it was, she didn't want to be around me or that she didn't value that. And so, over time, those miscommunications that,
stack up.
Yeah. They stack up and you start flying past each other and you don't even realize it. And I remember it was that weekend that you also, when you put us through that personality testing, that I was like, oh, that's the reason why she does that. Because she's dealing with all the present stuff and she's slowly walking her way into the future where I'm way in the future and I'm not even thinking about the 10,000 things that need to get done.
Yeah.
And, to be honest, in our marriage, she's the one who's largely scheduling babysitters and making sure the kids have their shots and all this stuff.
What about what's going on at school? And man, did
all
you think
those things? Yeah. And so I just lacked empathy for who she was, and I didn't see her for who she was, and then therefore, and she didn't see me for who I am. And so we were flying past each other, and just that one thing has been such a tweak. I'd say the other one that was a huge tweak was this idea of open and closed loop decision making.
We call it options open and make the decision. And it's a real thing.
Tell people about this one, because when we learned this about each other, it again changed really everything about our relationship.
It's huge. And guys, what runs underneath the personality testing we do is the Myers-Briggs. So many of us have seen it, and the letters don't mean a lot to us, and we all know we took it, but we don't know. We don't want to be boxed in, and they can't box me in as a personality. All we're doing, it informs you. It's a low-resolution lens about how you are wired. And there's three things that impacts it: nature, nurture, and choice. I mean, think about this. Nature, you're wired for details. You're raised by a family that is, they're pot dealers, and you spent most of your time going around with them servicing their clients. You're going to end up quite different than someone who's by nature detailed, raised in a German family of engineers and went to the best engineering school. Nature, nurture, and choice all show up in a composite of how you're wired. So this J and P is the big piece we're talking about: options open, options closed, or options open, make the decision. So for me, I'm options open. That's a P. And so I iterate and think about things, and I'm not going to make a decision. I'll get close. Ooh, almost made it, but didn't. Get close. Almost made it. Drives Ash bananas. Make the decision. Well, the only thing that forces me to make decisions are deadlines, and decisions must be made. I want to keep my options open because I've iterated and found great things along the way. Now, Ash collects all the data she needs in the amazing hard drive of her mind. This is the J, and gets everything she needs, and then she wants to make the decision. So how it shows up in a simple way, we're in Italy one time and we had some pizza left over and we're about to leave. And she said, "You want this pizza?" I'm like, "Leave it right there. I may get some." So she's working around, cleaning up, getting ready to go. She looks back up, "Do you want this pizza?" And her face is very red. I'm like, "Leave it right there. I may want some, may not." And she's angry. I said, "What's wrong with you?" "Well, do you know we got to throw the trash out? We got to clean everything up. There won't be a trash can on the way to this part of the airport." She's done detailed this thing up. I'm just thinking, do you want pizza or not? And so we have a heated fellowship is what we call our arguing right there over this pizza. And it's because she wants me to make the decision and I want to keep my options open.
Yeah. I mean, for us, we had talked about building a house, and it was, I think, the exact same thing. I mean, Erica is a J, a decider, and I'm a P. I like to keep my options open. So when we had, quote unquote, decided to build a house, for me, it was, yeah, the option is there that we can build a house. To me, it wasn't a real project. It wasn't actually happening until we dug a hole.
Right.
Like once we dug the hole, now we're committed. Now we got to go. But until we dig that hole, I mean, we're considering it. We're planning. We're doing some designs. We're doing some architectural work. We're thinking through it. And in her mind, we had decided 18 months ago we're building a house, and we, kind of got up to the finish line here. When I say the finish line, it's really the starting line of digging the hole in the ground. And I just kept getting more uneasy about it, and who's going to do all this work, and just less and less peace about it. And that was a major flashpoint when we came down to talk to you and Ash and Opelika. And I remember when we sat and did this personality testing thing, it was like a light bulb went off for both of us. It was like she could now see, so for him, we hadn't actually ever decided, because what she thought had happened was we had decided and then undecided, then decided and undecided. She was just worn out from that. She's like, look, did we decide to do this or do we not? And I'm like, what is her problem?
What
right?
are you talking about?
Like we're just talking about this house. Like, sounds great. Let's go ahead and move forward with the next step. Doesn't mean we're building the house.
Let's get to the next no,
let's go to
go
the next.
no.
Yeah, let's get to the next yes or no, right? But we don't need to decide on the whole thing. And for her, it's like I had just been jerking her around for 18 months now. Of course, she was irritated about it.
Right.
And so until we saw that, it was impossible. So I want to take it back to, we have small business owners, operators that are listening to this. How can they use personality testing, or should they think about it? Because Myers-Briggs, you also do some Enneagram work, right? What are the other tools? 5 Voices is another one.
5 Voices, and that's a lens that a friend of ours, Steve Cockram, created that actually uses Myers-Briggs as a source code, but gives you a simple way. It's free test, 5voices.com. We test all our teams, we test all our clients, we test all the people going to work in our place, and we use it as a way to meet them and be for them. If they're a present voice, you're going to know it because they're talking about the details. And they're talking about right now, tomorrow. And if they're a future voice, they're going to start, can you imagine when? If something's compelling enough in the future, they'll work back to the details. But the present voices are trying to get the details now and how it impacts us. And so what's hard is to build the bridge. And the bridge takes those present voices and brings them to the future, and the future voices back to the detail of the present, and allows them to see one another enough to do this. And it's hard on teams, right? A lot of times you'll have a leader come in and he's visionary, boom, 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 boom. And some of the things he's saying are dreams, which we call provisional. Some of them are real plans, we're going there, and some of them are promises he's made. Well, present voices hear all as promises pretty much. And so when you're talking and dreaming and they don't know it, they're thinking, oh my God, we've got to do it. And so it brings a lot of stress in a team when you don't see where someone's coming from, and when you don't have common language to say, have we committed to this? It's a promise. Are we going to do this but not sure how? It's a plan. Or are we just brainstorming? It's provisional. So we even label our meetings provisional, plan, and promise. We label all our decks we're making provisional, plan, and promise in the different categories. It's a common language that allows present voices to deal with people like me that are future.
What are some of the other sort of axes or dynamics that create these different voices? So we have the kind of future voice, present voice. We have the open loop or closed loop.
That's a JMP. And so the J's will finish their homework ahead of time, always did. P's get their excitement and the best work at the last moment. Boom, diving catch. Look at that thing. And so if the diving catches people are being supervised by the get it done ahead of time people, there is a lot of rubbing, or vice versa, right?
Yep.
Like one of our guys, Ty, I love him, but we'll work on a document for a week. And the last hour, 6 o'clock, the night before it's due the next day, he'll completely rewrite it. And I'm like, are you a psychopath? But he brings his best work out. It's magical. I was like, all right, if that's the way you play jazz, do that. So it's understanding one another and seeing whether not changing the deadlines, but allowing each of us to bring our best in the way we can. The other's thinker, feeler. The difference in a thinker and a feeler, if you want to think about this, a feeler sees people first. It sees everything through the lens of relationships. Okay, people matter more than projects. And what you'll notice about a feeler is they will often take everything that someone says to them personally. Thinkers very seldom take it personally. Think of a feeler putting their idea over their heart, and when you ask questions or shoot at it, you shoot them. A thinker puts the idea on the wall, and when you shoot at the idea, it just hits the whiteboard behind it. So thinkers can impersonalize a thought and say it's a good or a bad one and go with it. Feelers more often see them as personal. And so if you can ask yourself, do they feel their way to thinking or do they think their way to feeling? Once you get this, and of course you and your wife have this dynamic like we do as well. Ash is a thinker, I'm a feeler. 75% of all women are feelers. 75% of all men are thinkers. So when I meet a couple, usually I'm like the wife and Ash is like the husband, which is kind of odd. But if you realize this in your teams, I mean, would you put a thinker on the front line of handling customer service? Maybe. Depends on what you're doing. If you need this great level of empathy and someone that can feel what's happening. So it's just beginning to notice how, I mean, you don't put 5-foot-tall people dunking if they're not really used to dunking. They can do it maybe, but it's really hard. So line people up in such a way that their gifts and their wiring make their success almost inevitable.
Yeah, I remember when I was doing this with you and you said, Brent, you got this big old brain and this itty bitty little chicken heart. Little tiny chicken heart.
I regret saying that.
Yeah, I know.
Because then he said, I got a big old heart and a little bitty chicken brain.
That's exactly right. Paybacks.
Oh, you do payback good.
I know. So the last of the four is introvert, extrovert, right?
Right.
So basically, if you think about if the person is extroverted.
Well, we didn't do sensor or intuition either.
Oh, yeah, do that one.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, there's 5.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, there's 4. There's I and E, there's N and S, there's F and T, and there's P and J.
Okay.
So there's the 4 types. Introvert and extrovert, we'll do it because most people think they understand this one and we really don't. Introvert and extrovert, the difference is introverts receive their charging alone. It's not whether they talk a lot. It's not whether they can be a great speaker. It's not whether they engage with people. They just need to recharge alone. And at the end of your day or when you need to recharge, if you go for a run or you spend time alone or you need to read a book or you need to walk in the woods, more than likely you're predominantly introverted. Now remember, personalities, we're all right-handed and we're all left-handed. We're all introverts, we're all extroverts. It's what's dominant. We're all intuitive and we're all sensors. It's what's dominant. Feelers and thinkers, dominant, and J and P, judging and perceiving. But the extrovert charges up around people. The question maybe is like this. If you go to a wedding that you don't know anybody of an old friend and you get to meet 300 new people that you don't know, would that excite you or not? An extrovert would be like, oh, 300 people I've never met before. There could be like 80 new friends in there. An introvert would be like, I hope I can meet one person and kind of a few people and hang out to the side and have a small group of meaningful conversation. So it's where you recharge. That's introvert and extrovert. Intuitive and sensor is interesting. Intuitives always work off of patterns. They see patterns. Sensors are detail. So a sensor, you'll tell when they teach you something, they put things in order really well. 1, 2, 3, 4, just step by step. They're great at doing detail and accounting. And I mean, I really wouldn't want a lot of intuitives being my pilot early on in their thing. You want them to check the list and do everything twice. Intuitives see patterns. They're like 1, 2, 13, 4, 16, 5, 18. They're putting together things like a mosaic. And so they work primarily in the future and they see patterns. And so it's interesting because it isn't that we can't do the other side. It's just there's more stress. Like imagine if you're right-handed using your left hand a lot. That's what using your non-dominant gift is like. Now you can build your left hand up, but it's still got a stress to it. And so a lot of people are burned out and stressed out on our team because we put them in a position of something that they become proficient at that is against their wiring.
So it's almost like the Myers-Briggs and sort of this overlay of the 5 voices being a sort of a simplified packaging version of that.
Communication version.
It's communication, yeah. So like that's kind of the internal wiring. And then, you know, I heard somebody call the Enneagram just who you are in your base state or your flesh, right?
That's right.
And so Enneagram's a whole separate system. There's podcasts on it.
Very complex.
And it's very complex. And there's, you know, there are 9 numbers and how they all interplay and relate. And when you get stressed, you go to a different one. And so, you know, I mean, you did that with us as well.
That's right.
So you work with teams as well. One of the things we didn't talk about is, you know, you do these big real estate projects, you help with marriages, and you also help just kind of coaching to some degree, some really high performance teams.
Well, like we're doing an oil company right now that needs a new person to sit between the connection and production. They want to work on the culture. and on the production, and they want to make sure. And so even down to the type we're talking about, do you think an ideal ISFJ, an introvert, sensor, feeler, and judger would sit best in this detail role that needs to reach out to people? It's not everything, but it's something. And so, yeah, we're in the people.
So if I'm a leader of a company, whether I'm the owner, the high-ranking operator, and I've just really never done anything in the personality testing. And by the way, I'm saying this out of experience. It's kind of where I was, probably even 18 months ago to 2 years ago, right? I joked that Enneagram was astrology for Christians for a long time, right? I didn't put any value at all into it. And then, of course, it's like everything else in my life, it's humbling, out of ignorance that I didn't put much stock into it. And you learn, oh my gosh, there actually, it's incredible depth to this stuff. Let's say you're in more the place that I was, and say, look, I've never really done personality testing. I don't put a lot of stock into it. There's so many different personality tests out there. What would you advise somebody to baby step into that area? And what do you think the immediate impact on the team could be? How would you advise them to go about sort of initiating maybe a small project around this?
I think it's a great question. One thing I think for leaders is people are down on what they're not up on. So take the test yourself. Maybe take 5 voices because it's simple, it's free, and you get it. And from that, you can get your Myers-Briggs because all the voices are aligned on your Myers-Briggs. It's going to be approximately wrong and partially right, probably. A good percentage of them, it's only how you show up in your world. It's not who you are. It's a pair of shoes. You ordered them online and you hope the size is right. Try them on, but you can tell your people, so I got this test and I took it and it says kind of that these are my qualities. And it's saying I'm an introvert, so it's saying maybe I recharge in private. And it's also saying that, and the neat thing about the 5 voices, it gives you your weapon system. So everybody has a weapon system they use when they're stressed. So maybe you could say, hey, here's what it says it was, and here's what it said my weapon system was. Can y'all give me feedback how right this is, 1 to 10 or 1 to 5? Well, if you start doing it for yourself, that's the way the leaders have got to do it. They've got to live it before they give it. And so it ain't something everybody needs to do. It's something you need to do. And if it gives you some insight and not, hey, it's a low resolution lens, but I'm open. Most companies, all they want to know is, does he know he's this way? They know how messed up we are. They just want to know that we know. And we're willing to admit it. So that's the way through courage. Just say, guys, hey, this thing says that, I'm an extrovert and I'm going to struggle with discretion and discipline. Do y'all see me doing that in meetings sometime? And they're like, heck yes. And I'm like, well, could y'all help me? Well, see, now you're in a whole different thing. Everybody wants to help if you're ready to change. So that's what I recommend. Start with yourself.
Yeah, I would say it's great advice. I started exploring this stuff, 18 months ago. And, it's made a big difference in how I think about and how I'm aware of who people are that I'm working around. Obviously in my marriage, it's made a big difference. Even in my friendships, like if you can kind of put people into little bit different buckets, right? It's not to judge them. It's actually to build
How
empathy.
do I serve you? How do I come?
All of this stuff is not to say, oh, well, it's not to excuse behavior. Oh, well, they're just a blank, right? So they can't help themselves. It's like, no. All you're doing is, what is their wiring? What are their tendencies? So I know there's certain people who it's like, look, if I bring them a new idea, they're so present operating. They're so closed loop in how they think, right? It's like they're just going to have a tough time. It's going to take them a while. They got to go be an introvert, go off and think about it, right?
Need to send it to them early with some data and let them process.
They got to process it, right? And versus there's other people who I know, oh, this is the guy you get together and brainstorm with, right? It's like, yeah, let's make some jazz, right? What about this? What about that? Now, you don't want that person to then be the judger of should you go forward with the project. Because I've made this mistake too in the past where it's boy, you get into a room with somebody and you're like, we're going to take over the world. This is going to be $1 billion idea. And then you look back 6 months from it and you put in a ton of work and money into this thing and you're like, what happened? How are we so off? And it's like, oh, we hadn't thought through all the actual details to get this thing from A to B. We'd gone from A to Z. And yeah, Z is amazing, but unfortunately companies aren't built A to Z.
That's right.
They're built A, B and a quarter, B and 3/4. And so, I would encourage, as John said, I would encourage anybody who's listening to this, like really dive in to a couple of these tools and just get to know them.
And try them at home even, go to your wife or your spouse, your partner and say, let me tell you something. Here's what it said about me. Do you see any of these things? Believe me, you better wear your Kevlar a little bit if you're going to do this. Be in a good place because you don't want to ask, but you'll find out.
You said people have a lot of patience if you come to them and say, hey, this is what it says. I think I'm showing up this way. Do you agree? Because what that signals is, hey, I want to get better. I want to change. Right?
That's right.
I think it's when people aren't aware of it and you're like desperate. You're like, come on, man, you are so blind.
Right.
You don't understand how you're showing up and it's hurting everyone around you. There's this, fallout.
I mean, you ate a box of sardines and you're killing us. You don't even know there's broccoli in your teeth. Dude, just learn a little bit about yourself first. So start with you.
Yeah, self-discovery.
Right, it's huge.
So I want to talk about, you've been in a lot of different types of businesses. You worked with your hands, now you work with your brain primarily. You kind of made this transition from blue collar to white collar. Although, you still are involved in construction. We
have a construction company. We have real estate development. We have those properties we manage. So we have a portfolio of real estate. We have event business and an operational complex for building there as a resort. And we have our coaching and consulting, which is pretty much what I spend most every day encouraging people, adding value to people. I think there's 4 things I do that when I do it, it's got supernatural power on it. Help people grow personally, love God passionately, do good work purposefully, and live intentionally. And those 4 things, I think that's what I'm built to do. And so once you know your purpose, it gets pretty easy where you apply it. And so every day I get up and try to help people and places flourish. And we think companies and communities weave together to make a difference. What if we could be giving while we're living and knowing where it's going? What if we could use these gifts we have to make a difference and work at the intersection of purpose and profits? I think a lot of people work for purpose. A lot of people work for profits. Very few can weave those two together in a way that really, I always say, make your economics teacher and your Sunday school teacher happy.
Amen to that. So maybe you could talk a little bit about what are some of the big things you've learned as you've grown businesses? What are some of the struggles that you've had as you've scaled up the business? And maybe you can even talk about some of the current struggles that you're experiencing right now. By no means have you got it all figured out. It's one of the things I love about you.
Holy moly.
Well, I know. I think this is where, people hear it's like, oh, you're doing a lot of work with teams and with coaching and things like that. It's almost like I get this picture in my head of the guy who either one couldn't make it on his own. That's why you coach, right? If you can't do, you teach, right?
That's right.
Or you got somebody who's like, yeah, I've been there, I've done that, I've made my money. Now I'm kind of down gearing in life and I just want more freedom. But you're neither of those things. You're in the fight. You're in the fight in your marriage. You're in the fight with your kids. You're in the fight in your business. You are in the thick of things. And uniquely, I've really noticed this, and you are in the fight with a lot of other people, helping them in their fight. And so maybe you could talk about, it's so much easier to see other people's problems than your own problems, right?
Right.
So much easier to see other people's lives than your own. But maybe you could talk about your evolution through these businesses. What are some principles that you've learned? What are some things that you did 10 years ago that you wouldn't want to do today?
Well, a lot of belly flopping, guys. I made a ton of mistakes. Every way you can make them. My not to-do list is probably our most valuable list. But a lot of the mistakes I learned first with my gift, seeing in the future. I'm an ENFP. So that's an extrovert, intuitive, feeler, and perceiver. And in the 5 voices language, that's a connector, creative, see the future, message things, bumper stickers, which you notice I speak. Ash said, baby, you speak bumper sticker. I said, they stick. So bumper stickers are the way I see things. They're portable and memorable, and it's just how my mind works. But like a lot of things, I would see potential in people, and we called it a rent a dream program. I needed rent, and they had a dream, and we'd launch businesses with people who didn't have the character or the giftings to sustain them, and we hurt them and hurt us. And I hated that. So now we've learned when we're going to start a company, there needs to be a lot of dang eyes on it. And we have to identify where they are in their skill sets. And so we got when we launch restaurants all over America, inside of these towns we're doing for the benefit, iconic restaurants, because we believe food and beverage can build real estate values like nothing else. So our team is launching 3 restaurants in 3 cities right now. Real iconic, real unique. Nobody goes to a city and says, man, I had this amazing meal. It's Ruby Tuesdays. Nobody says that because the goal is to disappoint you at a rate you'll stand. We want to build things that are magical. But in learning that, I would launch it with people who didn't have the skills, and we'd get contractually tied up and things would get going and they would blow up. And instead of them falling out of a 1-story building and hurting themselves, I helped them get in a 5-story. And so that was a huge mistake. And so we don't do that anymore. We don't pick projects, we pick people. Our number one thing is you can't make a good deal with a bad guy. And you can't make a bad deal with a good guy. A bad deal with a good guy will turn into a good deal. And so we're getting a lot of eyes on what kind of person are they first. We usually have 3 meetings minimum after we've done all the personality testing, and we have 3 meetings with 3 different perspectives or voices. So we want one of those to always be a woman that we know is very intuitive, and we won't have it at we'll have a meeting at the office, a meeting maybe out on the golf course or at dinner, and a meeting somewhere else. We want to put them in 3 different environments, 3 different things, and we want to meet the spouse every time. The first meeting usually starts with the spouse if they have one on through, because any team member is going to play a big deal how the spouse is flourishing where they're coming, especially if they're moving to our city, right? And so we try to do that. We didn't used to do that, and so we would pick the wrong people, invest a lot of money and time, and they'd leave, and they were upset, and we were upset. Heard this one teaching, and it's kind of interesting, as comrades, constituents, and confidants. So a confidant is someone who loves you. They love Brent. And the only thing you can do to hurt a confidant is remove the Brent from their life. A constituent is for what you're for. We're for permanent equity. We're for equity being redone. They're for what you're for. And as long as you're for what they're for you. But if sometimes somebody comes by and is more for what you're for than you are, they're going with them. But a comrade is against what you're against. We're against the old system of private equity. And they'll be against what you're against until they're not, and then they'll be against you. They'll shoot you in the foxhole. And so there's those 3 kinds of people, and you got to try to decide, what are they for? What are they against?
I remember one of the times you told me that there's 3 types of relationships too. There's people for a reason, people for a season, some occasionally are for a lifetime. And you really got to hold it open-handed, especially when you first get into a relationship. What type of relationship is this, and why are they for me? Are they for what we're doing, or are they against what we're against? And I think that's a really good framework to try to match people into different buckets.
Well, now I always want it to be forever relationships. I'm always saying, this is a forever one. That put me in a bind too. It put undue pressure on the relationship. So hold them lightly. Some are for a reason, some are for a reason, some are for a lifetime.
Man, it's one of the things about you that I am in awe of is how much joy you live with and how carefree you are in many ways, right? I mean, you've got cares, but it's really incredible to have watched you now for quite a while and really to walk closely with you for quite a while now. I mean, we talk at least once a week, if not multiple times a week. You're bouncing stuff off me, I'm bouncing stuff off you, and you've really turned into somebody who I enjoy doing life with. Maybe you could talk to people about, has the joy always been there? And what is the source of your joy? Why are you excited about life? Because you just come across as just enthusiastic about life in a way that I think few people are. And it's definitely something that I look up to. I told somebody recently that my 30s, I just turned 40 recently, my 30s for the most part were up into the right in business. I had 3 beautiful children. The decade from the outside looking in couldn't have gone much better. And yet, I didn't enjoy it as much as I should have. I had moments of enjoyment, but I had a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear in that decade. And I was holding on to things really tightly. And I just get the impression, after spending so much time with you, you come across this initially, and the more time I spend with you, the more it just reinforces how much joy and how loosely you live in such a good way. Maybe you could just talk to me, why? How is that?
Well, and I'd say and you've helped me walk even recently through carrying cares. So it's not always, but I'm trending. It's better. And one reason is because I'm on a journey that looks like a detour that was magically laid out, that everything I went through has been part of where I'm going to. It's like the Matrix. I began to see that there's a creation and a creator, and that if he has a refrigerator, my picture's on it, that he's crazy about each of us, crazy in love with us, and that really life is a gift. When you lose something that means a lot to you, I lost Ash. I lost my wife, but then I found her again. And so when I got ready to hang myself, I was $1.5 million in debt. My partner had left me because he tried to take Ash and she wouldn't. She was committed to this other guy. And we're $99,000 overdrawn. And I was hooked on them drugs. So when I got transformed, I come back down. And the only thing was different is I had an eternal new perspective, but I was still $1.5 million in debt, still $99,000 overdrawn. And it took us over 7 years to repent one check at a time to get to zero. So I guess realizing that all that was for my good, that faith is like a muscle I mean, you can't pay nobody to do push-ups for you. If we could, me and you probably have somebody doing push-ups right now while we're in here. Just get in about 100 for us right now while we're talking.
I've tried. It doesn't work. It doesn't work at all. I still the same me.
But then I get to walk in miracles. And so that's really is because I love people and I finally realized what I was here for. Like the reason I was so disheartened so often is I was a fish trying to climb trees. And so if you figure out what you're here for, and you start seeing it as all of it as a gift, as something extra, it's magical. And I just found that I could work with my wife and build all these companies together. And we could talk about waterfalls and splits and 5 minutes later get naked and be together. And I just thought, never knew you could do this. I never knew that the person that I love could be the person I enjoy visioning with the best. And there's all kinds of miracles along the way, right? And so for each of us, we have those opportunities. We've got friends, we've got people, we've got situations. Look around, see what you're stewarding, and it gives you a good indication of how blessed you've been. Especially, imagine having tons of wealth and losing it all. Those people have a tremendous perspective, don't they?
So I was a hardcore atheist in my 20s. You obviously came to faith unexpectedly. Very different journeys, right?
Totally.
I came to faith. I had a lot of intellectual journey to coming to faith that I had. I don't think anybody comes to faith through their head. It's always got to be a heart, a surrender. But you had the surrender and didn't know much and then had to learn, like, what did I just surrender to?
What happened?
Just knew that God loved you and you were overwhelmed by his love. I had to loosen a lot of the ideas. And I think a big chunk of people who listen to this podcast that I would say are go-getters and that have been educated, they live in a strictly materialistic, there's nothing beyond logic and reason and nature, and the world is what it seems, and it is a harsh reality, but it just is. There's nothing deeper beyond this. There's nothing supernatural. There's no miracles, right? And so when you speak about miracles, I think it can catch people off guard. When you say miracles, you don't mean the small miracle. You mean there are literally gifts from God that are coming down that are illuminating this world. And I want to spend some time just breaking some paradigms, because I think for me, as I was a strict materialist, when I was an atheist, I thought the idea that there could be a God was just dumb. Like, it just didn't make sense to me. I'm like, look, I can see, I can feel the stuff around me. Science has told me that there's no God, right? Like, how could there be a God? And then things started happening to me that I couldn't explain. And I feel like that it's only somebody in their 20s that can really hold on to that atheism in the way that I did, because I just didn't have enough life experience to see how complicated and how there's just things that happen that you couldn't explain. Now, I know there's a whole sect of atheism that says, yes, you just assign God, you just call God whatever you can't explain.
Right.
And in some ways, it's true, but when those things happen in patterns and they happen in a way that is directing you in a certain direction over time, it becomes far more than just things you can't explain. It becomes obvious that there's some mover that's a creator and a creation. And so maybe I just want you to talk a little bit about some of the experiences you had that you didn't really believe either, and then all of a sudden, wham, you got hit with a new experience and you couldn't believe it.
Right.
Talk about some of those that were like talk about when you become a believer, you get crushed by God's love, you hear, kill yourself, and then God tells you,
Die to yourself.
Die to yourself.
I hear, take my life, and my heart says, lay your life down. Now, the different journey between you and I grew up in church, and I thought Jesus was some old dude that wore sandals. And I thought church was about hot dogs and hot girls. I mean, it's a crappy country club with big dues. And I just thought, man, this thing, it's got hot girls and stuff, but ain't nothing else. They do all this strange stuff, seem to sing songs over and over. And even when I got transformed, the first time Ash and I went to church, a newlywed Sunday school class, and we were going to go in there. Now, we're F-wording each other all the way to church. Our little kids crying in the back seat. We're just hollering at each other, you still seeing him? You did this. And we got a documentary online about our story, and there's a lot more to it. And it's a lot more difficult than even I've shared. But we go to this church, and so we sit there, and I said, man, this is where you get help at church. Go get help at the church. Well, that was my plan. So we go to this big Baptist church, and they say, any prayer requests? I hold my hand up. They're like, yeah, new couple. Look pretty nice over there. New couple. What's going on? I said, she's seeing somebody else. We're hollering at each other all the way to church. We need prayer. We need help. We hear all the chairs roll back, and I was like, oh, crap. They're not like us, baby. They're not messed up. The next guy's like, I have an unspoken prayer request. And the next guy was like, my cousin's toe in Idaho is hurting. I thought, guys, I don't know what's going on here. So after class, I was like, where are the miracles? Where are the blind people that are seeing and the lame people that are walking? We don't do that anymore. I said, I wouldn't quit drugs for what you guys got. I said, I need more. And if it wasn't so infinitely individual, God is individualizing stuff at a level that only a master, loving, caring, thoughtful person can do. It's just too dang good. Like people say you hear God. Well, God speaks to our hearts, and it's hard to know the difference in bad pizza and John and God sometimes, because it's like a radio station. You got AM radio, that's what we listened to when we were young, FM when we got older and got some logic, and God puts in an XM satellite, picks up everywhere, but you get to pick which station you listen to. I was listening to a lot more of other ones than him, but when I did get on a station with him, one thing I felt early on while Ash was still in this other relationship is that I was supposed to go and ask the guy she was cheating on me, our old employee, to forgive me. I was like, how and why? This is so unreasonable. And I felt, well, you've been a bad boss and you haven't been kind to him. And I went and said, I need to talk to you. And he thought, man, this guy, and I did want to screw a gun in his ear. No kidding. I was so dang hurt. And I had to have somebody to blame. But I obeyed. Delayed obedience is disobedience. In this time, I had some supernatural power, miraculous power to ask him to forgive me. And it worked for me. It healed me. I believe that God did that for me, not for him. Because if not, I would have hated that guy to this day. And so he has miraculously, through time, had us do things that brought about things you could never imagine.
Yeah, the currency, it feels like, of God is repentance and forgiveness. It feels like that's just the pattern. And I mean, even on the plane here, I was reading this little kind of daily reader, and there was one of the pages on forgiveness, and it just really hit me. And I feel like this is where God moves, and you just know it's not your own, because there's nothing in me that says, I want to forgive. There's nothing in me that says, you know what I need to do? I'm feeling anxiety. I'm feeling heavy. I need to forgive some people. Like, there's nothing, right? But this is where God, I think,
we're just going to need you to walk on your hands. I know your feet seem to work pretty good, but God's going to have you walk on your hands. It's a great plan. It's like, it's the upside down world.
It's the upside down. And sure enough, I mean, I felt compelled, and all of a sudden, all these people, it's probably 5 or 6 people that I'd been harboring resentment against. I mean, this is literally day before yesterday, harboring resentment against. And I just sat there and I confessed it. And I said, I am sorry that I've been holding on to this. And you know what? Instantaneously, I felt lighter. Instantaneously, the anxiety went away. And it was like I'd been holding on to these things. I didn't even know I was holding on to them. And I feel like it's such a beautiful picture of how real relationship works. We're going to hurt each other, right? We're going to say stupid stuff. There's no way to have an intimacy with anybody, friends, coworkers, certainly not your marriage, and for us not to hurt one another. If that's the expectations, you're living in fantasy world.
Right.
But what did most people do? What did I do, honestly? Shove it down, go medicate, go try to hide from that medication, be ashamed of how you medicate, right? And then over time, you just build all this toxic waste, all this thing in the bottom of your marriage, in the bottom of your friendships, this resentment, this sort of slow and low irritation with life. I mean, that's what my 20s were, man. I feel like my 20s were just this, I was irritated with everything. Everything tasted dull, tasted gray. The best wine tasted okay. The best food, it was fine. Nothing was exciting.
Right.
And I had everything. I'd been given so much. Again, my 20s were up and to the right. And it was like, I got to be 28, 29, and I was like, okay, I've won the awards, built this business. I've got more money than I ever thought I'd have. I've got a beautiful wife who loves me, and it was just nothing.
You believe there's a there, and there's no there. Because when you get there, you're there. I mean, you moved to Idaho, your problems are in Idaho. Because you look in the mirror and
Can't run away.
Can't run away. It's you. I mean, you're the common denominator. And one thing about forgiveness that I learned, and forgiveness for me now, I see it, most people think it's a vaccination. It's a one and done. Oh, glad I forgave my wife. Don't have to do that thing again. No. It's a minute by minute, second by second, hour by hour, day by day choice of your will. It's entering into a lifestyle of forgiveness that you'll continue as long as you're here. But remember, it's the forgiveness frees you. It's a freeing you. And if you don't believe in spiritual warfare, just try to forgive some people in yourself for a little bit. See, it'll show you God in a heartbeat because
just doesn't work.
It's so unnatural.
Right.
It's supernatural.
Yeah. No, like I said, no one wants to repent. No one wants to forgive. And repentance, by the way, I use that word, and that carries a lot of religious connotations to it. It is just a turning away from what you know.
About face.
And about face, right? It's a turning away from what you know that's not good and healthy in your life. It's a turning away from hurts that you've caused other people. It's saying, hey, I want a better way. I mean, the whole world is, I feel like, inundated with self-help, right? I mean,
Well, the church, in some ways, this organization is the best self-help thing going. I mean, it's like, we're going to teach you how to be better. We're going to teach you how to do this. And I love the churched world, but that's not what we're talking about today. No. We're talking about a heart leaning in a way that's just so very personal. Not walking an aisle and praying a prayer, but asking yourself, is there a creator that's crazy about you? And is there a whole 4D dimension going on of spiritual things?
Well, I think that's the church that I saw growing up and that I witnessed. It's a combination of religion, which I define as, hey, if you do these things well enough, if you obey well enough, here's a set of rules, do enough of these right, and you'll get favor in this life and the next. Combined with this sort of idea of sin management. It's like good people don't sin, bad people sin.
And you got to be good enough.
And you got to be good enough to get the favor, right? And so I always thought that was the dumbest thing. I was like, I see people in church, and I'm like, well, they're not doing a very good job sin managing.
Right.
Because I know who they are. They need to work on that, right? And this whole idea of like, well, how do I know if I'm good enough, if I'm going to get enough favor of all this stuff? It just never made sense. So, I rejected that, thinking that was Jesus.
That is what you're talking about. And I think about this guy used to wash cars in our town called Wax on Wheels. He's a Pentecostal holiness preacher that had a mobile car washing business on the side. And so he'd tell me, he'd come out and he'd see me wearing shorts. I just got born again. He's like, hey, you're going to hell for wearing them shorts. I was like, dude, what's wrong with you, man? Stop talking that stuff. Finally, he come by and he said, John, you're going to hell for wearing shorts. I said, well, where's the hell line? I said, well, I go to hell for wearing high waters. I said, you're so dang crazy. And people try to put on us all these rules. All God wants you to do is give up, lay it down, and tell him, say, hey, I love you. I see you. I believe in you. The church sometimes says, I tell you what, if you believe like we believe and behave like we behave, we'll let you belong. Jesus never said that. He said, woman at the well, you belong. He did that. She believed. And then her behavior changed. So belonging, God wants you to know you belong. I mean, if the thief can get saved, this whole thing's upside down. There's a guy hanging on the cross right next to Jesus. He looks over and he'd have been mocking him. You ain't the, and it's like, whoa, that's a big deal. Then finally he says, will you remember me when you're in your kingdom? He said, you'll be there with me today. That's how simple it is.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's the paradigms that I had to break. The church was so unattractive following Jesus. I mean, I didn't have a framework for it because, again, I thought it was all about sin management. I thought it was, rub the genie the right way and you get what you want, right? And it's just the exact opposite of that. I think I remember when I heard the gospel for the first time and somebody said, no. God loves you. God loves you now. God loves you right now as an enemy of his. He loves you right now. You already belong.
Right.
You just need to surrender. And then once you surrender, God will change you, but don't worry about that. Don't worry about it. You'll be fine. Don't worry about it, right? And I just remember thinking to myself, like, wait, I behave differently after God loves me, not God loves me because I behave differently. And they were like, I don't know what that other thing is. That's religion. That's not
rules and regulations without a relationship.
Correct.
And the other thing, love. When I got born again, I thought, God, if love is the high jump bar, I'm screwed. I can't jump that high. I got to be patient, kind, long-suffering, no records of wrongs, hopes all things, believes all things, does not behave rudely. I got to do all that to be a person that you can use, that can love. He said, no. That's how I'm going to be to you.
It sounds too good to be true.
That's the story.
I mean, the gospel means the good news is the best news in the history of the world. And I remember when I heard it, and I remember thinking to myself, oh, wow. So that's the thing that transforms lives. And lucky for me, I got to see some lives that have been transformed by it. You know, when I was an atheist, God started surrounding me with people who I was like, wait, what is that? They've got an incredible marriage. They like each other a lot. And by the way, they're soft and gentle and kind and unconcerned with themselves and generous, but not in a way that I see my atheist friends being, and not what I see in me. They had a peace about them. They had a kindness and a gentleness about them, but they were powerful. It wasn't
attractive.
It was so attractive. And I remember thinking to myself, like, okay, what do they have? Like, what is that thing they're taking, right? And then they would tell me it's Jesus. And I'm like, oh, you gotta be freaking kidding me.
Come on,
man. You know, gosh, look, I know about that. Right. You just don't sin as much. And then, rub the genie the right way. And they're like, no. What are you talking about? That's not about following Jesus. To see the heart change in you, I think that if people had gone back and seen you in your 20s, it would be unrecognizable.
People that knew me then, again, I can't convince the people that know me now how I was then. I was a liar, a deceiver, and a supplanter. All I cared about was myself, and I would hurt people. And I was consumed by it. And I wanted to not be that way and was helpless to stop it. And one thing I can tell you about sin, it takes you further than you want to go. Cost you more than you want to pay. You don't plant corn and get apples. If you don't like what you're reaping, you better talk to the man doing the planting. And so I just made a life, and we don't change usually till it hurts too bad and costs too much, until the pain of staying the same is less than the pain of changing, or till we know enough we want to.
I feel like, and that John is still here, and that John still pops up.
Absolutely.
But it has been covered with such a gentleness and a kindness. And I would say the same thing in my own life. Like, I mean, to see the trajectory that how I feel internally, it's been unbelievable, but it's been a slower process in many ways than I would have expected. Like, it is not a quick thing. I remember when I really believed, and I remember saying, okay, my life's going to be completely different. And by the way, in that moment, it was, and it wasn't.
You went right back into the same life you had the few minutes.
I think what you said in the beginning was, when you first were saved and you had a marriage, you had like 29 days of hell and 1 day of heaven. Mm-hmm. And now it's 29 days of heaven and 1 day of hell. I would say that is the path. It's like over time, the journey is that you experience more and more peace and joy. Over and over again, you experience more freedom.
Longer.
They get longer,
and the pain gets a little shorter, and you start seeing a little better. But it's just a journey. It's a step-by-step deal, and
we're all frauds. We're all hypocrites. And so if you see somebody a moment in time, because I think this is another thing that when I first became interested, I would call Christian curious, right? I would sit there and I'd be like, oh, I can't believe that guy's in church. I can't believe that guy. I know that guy's a bad guy.
Yeah,
and it's like, no, wait a minute. Now I look back on that, I'm like, I was a bad guy. Thank God they allowed me to be in church, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Jesus said, I didn't come to call the healthy. He said, I'm a doctor. I came to call the sick. And so when you look at somebody else's life, unless you've been tracking with them for a long time, it's hard to see trajectory.
Right.
And by the way, Jesus says, unless there's fruit in your life, unless your life's bearing fruit, like don't be assured that you know what's really going on. And I see a lot of this happening in the church where it's like, oh, well, I go to Sunday church service, so I'm saved. The joke in my hometown is that the church I go to is the largest gathering of atheists every Sunday morning, right? There's a lot of Christians that go there. There's a lot of people who don't get it. They want to take their kids to church so they can be quote unquote good people. I don't know how
a lot
I've
of people
that.
have been to McDonald's and they're not a hamburger.
Right.
I mean, it's a heart change, and roots create fruits. Every gift that you had one way before it was redeemed is different redeemed. So for example, what's the difference in motivation and manipulation? Why you do it. I used the gifts before I knew God to manipulate people because it was good for me. Now I use the exact same gift, re-envisioned by His love, to motivate people, which is good for we.
Yeah. I remember our mutual friend, Trevor Hightower, said a big difference between operating on clean fuel and dirty fuel, but the engine still runs. So from the outside looking in, you can't tell what you put in the gas tank. But ultimately, the dirty fuel is going to gunk everything up, and your engine's going to stop working. And I would say I experienced that my 20s especially. It was just like I would just burn myself out left and right. And, burnout doesn't come from hard work.
No.
Burnout comes from fear and anxiety.
Yeah.
So, when I see somebody who says, hey, I'm burned out, I've just been working a ton, all this stuff, it's like, well, hard work is actually a good thing. God gave us hard work because we're co-create, build the garden, grow the kingdom alongside him. Hard work's great. Hard rest is also important. The Sabbath, right? Like work hard, rest hard,
right?
Pray hard. But anymore in our culture, I feel like what we've decided on is, okay, you are what you produce, your utility, which means be more useful and then you'll be more loved,
right?
Which leads to endless work. And we associate then work with burnout. We associate work with depression. We associate work with a lack of control. It has nothing to do with the work. The issue is the heart posture, right?
Right.
I mean, if we are doing it for the other, for the good of the other, for God, if we're doing it and saying, hey, I want to participate in whatever this reality is, it's the most beautiful thing. You can work hard.
Oh, yeah.
And then you can also lay it down and leave it. Because
Yeah.
I could never do that.
And it's identity, too.
It's identity.
Identity drives behavior. If you want to know how you behave, look at what you believe. Because our beliefs drive our behavior. Oftentimes we feel like everybody's trying to assess our net worth. Hey, what kind of business you in? Land. Ooh. How much land you got? An acre. It's in Manhattan. I mean, we're trying to figure out, is someone worth it? And I want to tell you, if you know God and if you accept as simple as that thief did, your net worth, if you look on your personal financial statement, you can put Jesus in that thing because that's what people like us cost.
Thank you to John Marsh for joining us today on the Permanent Podcast. We've been talking a lot about Main Street Summit, teasing it. Well, tickets are officially on sale right now. You can head to mainstreetsummit.com. You can buy your tickets, you can see our ever-growing list of speakers and presentations, or you can even raise your hand if you're interested in becoming a sponsor. We call it Main Street Summit, but really it's going to be a lot more like a festival. Lots of things going on all the time. Choose your own adventure. We think everything that's going to be happening is going to be really valuable, whether it be kind of a macro level, big presentation, everyone can attend it, all the way to these deep dive niche sort of things that you might be wanting to learn more about. And as always with these kind of things, sometimes it's the stuff that happens outside of the presentations just while walking on the sidewalk to the next thing that ends up becoming one of the most valuable things. So we hope you'll join us this November 8th and 9th. Go to mainstreetsummit.com. Clayton did tell me that by the time this podcast comes out, we may be sold out. So there is a limited supply of tickets. Get there ASAP. Hope you see you this November. Thanks for listening.
This podcast is made available solely for educational purposes, and the information presented here does not constitute investment, legal, tax, or other professional advice, and should not be construed as an offering of advisory services, or as a solicitation to buy, an offer to sell, or a recommendation of any securities or other financial instruments. The thoughts and opinions expressed by or through this podcast are those of the individual guests and speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of Permanent Equity. The discussion on this podcast of any entity, product, or service does not imply an endorsement thereof, and the guests of this podcast may have a financial interest, whether through investment or otherwise, in any one or more of such entities, products, or services. This podcast is presented by Permanent Equity and may not be copied, reproduced, republished, or posted in any form without its express written consent.